Eugene Mulero with Transport Topics, and joining us today is Tom Smith, Executive Director of the American Society of Civil Engineers. Tom, thank you for joining us.
Glad to be here. My pleasure.
Of course. Tom, you guys came out with your quadrennial report card on March 9th, and you gave the country's infrastructure an overall grade of D+. And that matched the grade that ASCE gave the country back in 2013.
Correct.
So to set it up, some people are asking, has infrastructure improved in this country?
Well, unfortunately, we failed to invest in infrastructure the way we need to, Eugene.
Okay.
And you probably got it, when you see the report card, we were disappointed to see a D+ carry forward from 2013 to 2017, as you referenced. There were some good news. I mean, there were some categories, 7 categories increased in their grades.
Okay.
3 categories decreased in their grades. Overall, you still have 12 out of 16 categories of infrastructure that were in the D range. So ultimately, we ended up with a D+ again. We're still failing to invest in our infrastructure, and much of it is getting towards the end of its useful life.
A lot of our audience are using our highways and bridges and tunnels. How did the roadways fare in the report card?
Well, the surface transportation, if you look at the funding gap with infrastructure and what is needed right now, a D+, by the way, is in the poor at-risk range, and we want to get it up to at least a B, which would be good, at least for current purposes. You look at the infrastructure spending gap, it's about $2 trillion between now and 2025. Over half of that is surface transportation. So looking at surface transportation in roads, the score was a D. You look at rail, the score was a B. Transit, D-. Bridges, C+. So we have a long way to go.
When we look at bridges, it's something like 56,000 are structurally deficient. Are the bridges in the country improving overall? Are they still the same? Are they, because we see these headlines of crumbling bridges, crumbling infrastructure. How are the bridges?
Yes, well, as you point out, we still have a significant number of structurally deficient bridges. With the grade of C+, while it fares pretty well relative to the Ds that we've seen, still nowhere near where we need to be. We're not investing in bridges as we need to. The average age, again, is nearing the end of its useful life for much of our bridges. A prime example of one is the Memorial Bridge right here in D.C.
Yeah, you can't even, the Memorial Bridge does not equip buses anymore, right?
Exactly, and you probably heard me reference, I kayak under that bridge quite a bit.
That's
and
right.
you get up underneath and look at it, and you don't have a whole lot of pride in infrastructure. Certainly is something as iconic and important bridge like that.
Can you talk about how poor infrastructure impacts our traffic patterns, especially for trucks around the country? How does it affect the everyday driver?
Well, I think the statistics, we're spending over 40 hours, a year sitting in traffic, and that's an average in the country. And if you're in Los Angeles, I think is over 100 hours.
That's right, yeah.
Which is, a full vacation week for you, and so it's pretty significant. And we are seeing, a lot of times people, that's costing everybody. It's not just sitting in traffic, it's repairing your cars from potholes and that sort of thing. And as a consequence, it really also increases the cost of goods and services because we're not moving people and freight as effectively and efficiently as we should. Additionally, you look at 35,000 people a year are killed on our nation's highways, so that's over 100 a day. We seem to take that for granted, and we should not be tolerating that. And when we look at automated and connected vehicles and new technology that we can utilize in the future, that's another reason we need to invest in our infrastructure. We're relying on infrastructure, a highway system that was designed, built back in the 1950s, under President Eisenhower.
That's right, yeah.
Visionary at the time, but we really have to think about what's the future hold, and we need to invest in infrastructure so we can have the latest technology and safety, efficiency, sustainability, innovation, resilience, new materials and means and methods. So we really got to look forward and not continue to live in the past. I think we've sort of skipped a generation in many ways when it comes to infrastructure. We're relying on what was done in the past and not investing in the future.
How do we go about investing in infrastructure? Capitol Hill, transportation leaders over in the House and Senate are still, debating a funding option. What would be one way to come up with the money?
ASCE has continued to advocate for an increase in the gas tax. So back in the 1950s, President Eisenhower and the administration and Congress had to figure out, how do we invest in this? How are we going to pay for it? So we had options. We could toll, we could tax. Ultimately, they elected to move forward with the gas tax. The gas tax is at 18.4 cents a gallon. It hasn't been increased since 1993.
Yeah.
We believe that should be increased. In fact, ASCE's policy recommends an increase of 25 cents of the federal gas tax. Many states recognize the importance of that type of funding mechanism and have increased their state gas taxes. In the last 4 years, 19 states have increased their gas tax. And those folks have been able to get reelected. The incumbents were reelected even when they did that in red and blue states. There is a concern about increasing the federal gas tax that becomes very political. And so there's also a focus on financing, public-private investments and partnerships. And ASCE certainly supports that. We think that's an appropriate avenue to pursue. And so we support public-private partnerships. We don't think it's going to get you there. We don't think we're going to be able to close the entire investment gap that's needed for surface transportation on public-private partnerships alone. And ultimately, you also have to recognize when you have public-private partnerships, those costs do get passed on to the user. We, the American people, are going to have to pay for this one way or the other. So we can pay through tolls, we can pay through taxes, we can pay through vehicle miles traveled, user fees. There's a lot of different mechanisms that could be utilized. But right now, the cleanest, quickest, clearest solution is to increase the gas tax. We could do that right away. There have been multiple bills that have been proposed to do that.
Yeah.
We would very much support that.
And just, getting a little poli-sci right now, when you hear Speaker Ryan in the House saying that the gas tax is, not on the table, he's not going to increase it. He had this very marquee Ways and Means hearing when he was the chairman of that committee, in which he just flat out said, under his watch, that's not going to happen. Here you are talking about increasing the gas tax. How realistic, is this option on Capitol Hill?
Well, certainly we've been advocating for this for some time,
yeah.
And it hasn't been increased since 1993, as I referenced. So we do have to be realistic, and we know that politically it's fraught with issues. However, we're getting to the stage where we really have to have action. We have to be proactive. We cannot continue to be reactive. We can't wait for the next disaster to have a response to this.
Yeah.
And it'll be far more cost effective if we are proactive. Recognizing that, we have to realistically look at the alternatives. Financing, public-private partnerships absolutely makes sense, but it will not close the entire gap. And it will also still transfer costs to the users, as any option will. So we think in order to do this, we have to be realistic, and that means increasing the gas tax. Now, there are also options like vehicle miles traveled. That's a good way to do it as well, especially since the gas tax is going to become more and more stressed as we have energy-efficient vehicles and such. So vehicle miles traveled is another option, which is being tested in pilot programs in, I think, 6 different states across the country.
Oregon, California.
Hawaii,
yeah.
Exactly. That the technology is evolving, and you have to look at a lot of different issues associated with that, and I think we'll get there with that. But in the near term, in the immediate term, the gas tax is a clean, efficient, clear way to do it, and it can be done very quickly. But you're right, politically, yeah, it does raise issues, but I think we have to recognize just how important infrastructure is. It is, everyone recognizes the bipartisanship, behind it, and that everyone supports infrastructure investment for our global economy.
Yeah.
We're falling behind other countries. We're not even in the top 10 with global infrastructure rankings, for the World Economic Forum. So what do we do about that? We have to do something. We can't continue to just say we have to invest in infrastructure and not come up with any solutions. And so people say, well, how are we going to pay for it? My question is, how are we going to pay for everything else in the budget? Because we ought to have a national vision and prioritize infrastructure first. And if that's the case, then you figure out how do you pay for everything else.
What is your expectation, your group's expectation, that Congress and the White House are going to unveil this $1 trillion infrastructure package? They're going to debate it and try to move it?
Well, I'm optimistic because of the things that I've heard. One of the things that's been wonderful about the report card is I truly think it has changed the conversation. People have recognized the problem, And we've done failure to act studies with economists that have showed here's what it costs if we fail to act. Here's the hidden tax, because right now we're taxing all American citizens by failing to act. Every family's paying $3,400 a year in added costs by failing to invest in infrastructure. So we got to say, well, now if we took that money that we're costing them now and took some of that and utilized it to pay for infrastructure, we could actually save them money. So if we recognize that, we should be able to get some kind of action from Congress. So I continue to be optimistic because of the things I heard, both candidates in the presidential campaign we heard from. President Trump, we've heard promises on $1 trillion investment over 10 years, and we think that's a very positive thing. And so I still remain an optimist. How we pay for it is another issue. And we've heard things about tariffs and repatriation and infrastructure banks and P3s. I throw the gas tax in there and say all of the above. Let's go full steam ahead on all of these options and pursue them as vigorously as we possibly can, because this is so important.
Finally, before we wrap up, Tom, I do want to ask for your group's reaction to the White House's fiscal 2018 so-called skinny budget proposal. One of the key things in there that popped out at me was the no funding for the Tiger grants, this infrastructure grants.
Yes, exactly. And we were disappointed. We believe that it's important to invest in infrastructure, as we just talked about. And and I know the statement that I have heard is, well, while this budget removes some of the funding for infrastructure, there'll be a separate bill for infrastructure.
Yeah.
Again, I go with all of the above. I would not be pulling back infrastructure investment. We're trying to maintain a D+ right now. And if we pull out infrastructure investment that we have in the current budget and then rely on something unforeseen, and with undefined in the future, concern about that. So we believe we should maintain the existing funding that we have, not pull back on the funding that we have for things like Tiger grants,
exactly,
and then add to it with a separate infrastructure bill.
I like it. Tom, thank you for joining us in Capital Agenda. And check out ttnews.com for all the latest news about infrastructure. Thanks.